And so I'll just read from the slide. User interviews, according to the Interaction Design Foundation, are typically performed with the potential users of a design as part of an ideation phase or during early concept development. They follow a structured methodology whereby the interviewer prepares topics to cover, makes a record of what is said, and systematically analyzes the conversation after the interview. One of the first things I wanted to cover, and this is something that it's surprising how often this is skipped, right? Or done hastily. You really do want to know your goal, right? Are you at a point in your project where you're just kind of uncovering user problems? Are you just uncovering insights? Many times I've worked in projects where, kind of the insights were sort of assumed and we went right into solutioning. And, you're missing some opportunities there. Or are you evaluating a proposed solution, right? Do you have an idea that you want to run past somebody? Usability testing, right? There are similarities between these two types of user interviews. There are also some notable differences, so it's useful to know the difference. Your methods will hinge on your goal, and later you're going to present some findings at a certain point. Be sure to reiterate that goal later on. Recruitment. What is a user interview without participants? Behavior trumps demographics, right? Many times folks will start recruiting and they'll start to think, well, I really want to reach people of this particular gender or this particular age or this particular region or whatever it is. I would actually pause and say, well, is the gender, the age, the region, are those the things that matter the most to the people that you want to learn from? Maybe they are, but chances are their behaviors are really what matter more. Do you want to start slicing things too thinly because you actually have to find these folks in many instances? Do you want to start putting requirements on your participants that don't matter that much and is going to make it harder to find them? Does everyone using your solution act just like you? Remember, we're talking about behavior. Probably not. So this is where you need to ensure you are reaching a representative sample of users to ensure that you're solving the right problems in the right way. Now, does everybody know what I mean by representative sample? Oftentimes, hey, if we're reaching people, depending on your method, you might be reaching friends of friends or just folks who are convenient around you. The people who are around you are going to be more similar to you than you might realize. So you definitely get kind of an echo chamber effect. You want to be sure to at least be aware of that and try and take measures to counter that. So a couple of ways to recruit. If you want to recruit on your own, listen, I know there are tools out there are services out there. Not everyone has the budget, and it's not always useful. It's not always called for. If you are recruiting on your own, depending on who you need to reach, you can use social media groups. Those are great because those folks gather in many times based on behavior, right? So, and I don't mean just reach out to your Facebook friends. I mean actually go and find particular groups on Facebook. If you're working within a larger organization, you can certainly reach out to current customers and current users. That's one thing I like to do a lot. I've made friends with our account managers at my company. First of all, you can tap their shoulder in a pinch and sort of ask them what they think about certain things. But more importantly, they can lead you to end users who they know are going to be a little more helpful, a little more talkative. They can do some of the screening for you just sort of naturally. And then finally, hey, maybe you're just getting your feet wet. You just want to try this out. If nothing else, talk to friends of friends. What do I mean by friends of friends? If you're like if I call up my best friend and I ask, what they think about something, it's not going to work. It's going to be too informal. They're not going to take me seriously. We're going to be telling inside jokes. That doesn't work at all. But what you might do is ask that person for their friends who you've never met and kind of make connections that way. Just be aware, because you're reaching through your own personal social network, that even friends of friends are going to be more similar to you than you probably want. But, hey, it's better than nothing. As an alternative, there are recruitment services available, and sometimes they include additional research features. Think of like usertesting.com. So if you've got the budget, know that those can be really helpful. And for these, you will often provide screeners. These are questionnaires to filter out the best participants, right? You do want to consider, well, do we want people who are tech savvy or not? And if so, then you probably want somebody who uses either a phone or a tablet or a laptop computer at least 5 times a week. When you're really solving a real problem, you'll think of other requirements, other behaviors that you want to make sure are present in your participants. So, with that in mind, you would then write a screener, which would, in the long run, prevent you from having to waste your time interviewing folks only to find out that they don't have a smartphone or some other disqualifier, right?
Hey, Mike, question.
Yes.
So, yeah, you lightly mentioned one topic, and that was maybe using proxies. You didn't call it out proxy, but talking to your salesperson,
Mm-hmm.
and them potentially serving as a representation of the market. So there's that, and these are things that we all face. That getting access to users. I know I worked on a project where one of the UX people had great relationships with specific dealers, but it was a set of dealers, and every time we had questions, we went to the same set of dealers.
Yeah.
And so, how do you balance between proxies are okay, but I think anybody who's done enough would agree that that's nice but not good enough. You need to talk to that end user. But then there are times where you're limited in your access to those end users because the recruitment tools out there don't cover dealers because they demand to be paid.
To specialize, right?
They want to get feedback.
For sure, yeah.
So that's that's a use case that has complexity and limitations. How would you look at a problem like that?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll tell you what I've managed to do a couple times in different companies. First would be to get to know as many different account managers as you can. I don't want to say that you should do this if you can avoid it, but if you're really in a dire situation, you can talk to the folks who know your customers best, right? Use them as you say, a proxy. Use them to actually participate in the research, because hey, maybe you're a designer or a product manager or on the engineering team. So don't talk to folks like that. But at least if you're talking to folks who do know your users well, it's not perfect, but it's a whole lot better than just talking to the other folks on the product team. And in some ways, they have a really nice sort of ambient knowledge of the end user. A few of these housekeeping tips I've touched on a little bit. It seems obvious after you see it, but I'll point it out anyway. Hey, maintain a spreadsheet of participants. Make sure, of course, keep a list with their contact info, but also, regardless of where you got them from, keep them all in the same list. Make sure you're noting the most recent study that they took part in. This is, of course, if you're doing it yourself. Include other notes about how helpful they were. Connectivity, was there one video chat tool that worked for them? Right? The best time of day to reach them. Anything that you feel is important. And one of the reasons to do that is you don't want to overuse the same people. Sometimes people will ask me, well, let's create a group of dealers, I work with dealers, car dealers. Let's create a group of folks that will be like our inside helpers, and we'll be able to tap their shoulder whenever we need help. I would say actually that's not a great idea if you can avoid it, because you don't want to be speaking to the same individual all the time. What happens then? That means that a very small number of voices are going to be impacting your product when you want the product to appeal to a wide range of folks, right? And the general rule of thumb would be, if you've spoken to somebody, try and wait 6 months before you speak to them again. Of course, that is only possible if you have enough folks, and that's only possible after you're able to grow your list a little bit. But that's something you can strive towards. And one way to grow is to ask for referrals. Hey, you've got somebody on the phone, you're interviewing them. Consider asking them at the end, hey, this was great. Do you know anybody else who is like you in X, Y, and Z ways? Would they want to do something like this as well? Sometimes sometimes you have budget for like an Amazon gift card or something, which might help with the recruitment. There are debates on whether or not that is truly helpful, but I would say that is a possibility. Qualities of the interviewer, and these are more relevant than you might think in the real world. You're seeking truth, not proving a point. In other words, if you're setting out to prove that you're right, this design that you've created is right, or your hypothesis is right, that's really not the best way to use research. You really should be viewing yourself as kind of an impartial seeker of truth. And that will show in the way you write your questions. That will show in the way you moderate your sessions. That will show in the way you present your findings. Be a believer and a lover of the truth, right? Second point here, you're going to have assumptions. Whether you realize it or not, you're going to have base assumptions. And it almost always happens. You're going to start talking to folks, and some of those base assumptions might get shattered on the spot. Or you might get this creeping sense of doubt. Oh, wait a minute, maybe that thing that I told everybody actually isn't true, right? So roll with it. Be ready to dive into it. If your assumptions get shattered, that should be your moment to say, wait a minute, why? What's going on here? You should be fascinated by that. Of course, you want to prepare. So prepare questions and follow-ups using precise language. Make sure that it's language that everyone can understand, right? That goes for the use of jargon, all that stuff. And then finally, you don't want to reveal your own opinion. And that's why, we talk about this idea of a poker face, of course.
Just sharing thoughts, Mike.
Sure.
I think the biggest challenge, my background is in product. The biggest challenge I see with my product managers is that last slide and your first slide around setting goals. So setting goals going in, and then interviewing in as you describe it, just almost a detached manner of having no point of view, just understanding and gathering information. Not being, it's natural. I think any of us without this guidance engage in a conversation with someone, and you in the process of engaging about your product, you're going to get excited. You're going to talk about, what if I did this? What if I
Yes.
built this for you? And that starts to destroy the value of what you're actually trying to uncover. So,
right,
sharing my experience.
I feel the same way. It's so tempting to get into solutioning. It's so tempting, even like if somebody says something that kind of supports your assumptions, you go and you can it's almost evident in your voice that you're in agreement, which can actually be a little tip off. It can be dangerous. So it really does take practice.
The person being interviewed starts to key in on how you're reacting,
mm-hmm.
and then they want to continue. There's an Amy Chess, if she could be on this, would just educate us on all those nuances of now that person's trying to, in some ways, are they trying to please you because you've reacted well to something that you said?
Yes.
And now where do they take that? And that's a really interesting dynamic that it's hard to some people just don't understand. I mean, I didn't
Yeah.
understand it until I got educated about it.
Well, sure. And even if you do understand it, it's hard because, it almost feels antisocial. Here are folks that are giving up part of their day to talk to you, whether they're getting compensated or not. I'll say to folks like, hey, I'm not being antisocial, I swear, but if I don't answer your question, it's because I want to draw information from you. There are ways to prepare folks in the beginning so that way it kind of
Right.
takes the awkwardness out of it, but
Yep.
still preserves the, that neutrality.
And for me, what I do is I use a script that actually kind of kicks off the interview so that it's even when I'm interviewing a friend, that script then changes the tone. We're friends, we're making jokes, and it's like, are you ready to start? Okay, let me read this. I'm going to read this. It sets the tone. It sets how I'm going to react, how I'm not going to react. I'm not going to respond to anything. And it actually is helpful for both people to
Yes,
create that almost like a barrier for the interview. So that when you enter it, you're in interview mode, and then you can exit it and then start,
yes,
being a regular person again.
yes, agree.
But one of the things that I find too is that sometimes you would need to avoid a a uh, a customer research call, avoid that turning into a sales call, because a lot of times you have a conversation and they start leading into things that, oh, I wish it worked this way, or it doesn't work that way. And maybe in that situation it really does work that way, but you'll find yourself trying to correct that information
Oh, yeah.
and trying to highlight information that you're not even really trying to research, but you're just trying to just enhance of how things actually work and how things actually operate, and it just turns into a sales call. And I just find that if it starts turning that way, where someone is saying how something operates, I'm not going to go into the correction mode. I'll just take that back to have someone else that's supposed to either do training or that's supposed
Right.
to do account management, and have them handle that type of situation, as opposed to not getting the research that I really need.
That's right, and that's why I think it's difficult for folks. You mentioned training. If it's your job to help people to understand, if it's your job to disseminate information, it then becomes extremely difficult for you to then draw out information from others. The job of the interviewer is to draw out information from folks. It's not to supply any information necessarily. So that's the challenge. It's really a lot better if it's a different person. And on that note, you're also not the complaint department. Participants in the real world, I'll just point these things out. You will have no shows planned for it, along with all of the other strange things that might happen when you're trying to reach out to human beings. Somebody's internet's going to go down. My power went out for about 30 seconds in the middle of one recently. All that stuff is going to happen. Some folks will not be as helpful as others. This isn't your fault. There are different personalities out there, and some folks are going to want to talk about their own agenda. There are some folks you can kind of get them back on track, but not everyone. Setting the context for your participant, you do want to point out you aren't testing them, right? They might think that they're being evaluated. They're not. So it's helpful to tell them that. You want to tell them that their thoughts will guide the creation of, whatever it is, because it really does. These folks really are helping to guide you. Let them know that it's going to make them feel good, and that I feel is maybe even a better motivator than that Amazon gift card to be engaged. A couple of perhaps smaller points, but also helpful. You only want their thoughts, right? What I mean by that is you don't want them to imagine what other people may think or do, right? How many times have I listened to someone and they say, "Well, that thing is I know how to click on that thing, or I know what that thing means, but I don't think other people will. Um, all right, noted, but you knew what it meant. And, out of 5 people, all 5 people that I interviewed knew what that thing meant. That matters a whole lot more than what they imagine other people would think, right? And also to focus on real recent experiences. And by recent, I mean, hey, maybe within the last 6 months, the last 3 months. No hypotheticals if possible. Sometimes you have to, but if you can avoid it, stay away from these blue sky futures. Like, hey, if you had all the money in the world, or all the time in the world, or just generally, what would you do, or what might you do? You're going to get sprawling answers from that. It's much, much more helpful. Hey, past behavior is the best indicator of what someone will do in the future. So if you can focus on recent experiences, which may be similar, you're going to get much more useful and actionable information. And finally, in some states, it is the law to ask someone's permission before you record. So you do want to record these. So just make sure you get permission. In some cases, like if it's in person, you might even want to have a permission form for that they can sign. Right? And so now you've set your goal, you've got some participants by recruiting them, you've scheduled them, you've even got one on the phone, you've shared with them this preamble. Hopefully you kept it brief. Now consider the hourglass shape. I really like this idea. And basically what it means is the hourglass interviews will help you draw out the specifics you need without biasing participants. Essentially, if you ask a granular small question too soon, you're going to you're going to focus them on that small granular issue, and you'll have missed an opportunity to learn from them about other things that are on their mind. So the sequence matters. First, I'm down to my numbered list here. First, you want to get an understanding of the broader, more unbiased thoughts, right? You can phrase questions in certain ways. Think of the questions you want to ask them and kind of zoom out, right? Try and zoom out and get a bigger picture, a bigger sense in the questions you're asking. Then and only then do you get into specifics, and that you'll make your stakeholders happy by getting the specific questions answered. And then finally, what's the base of the hourglass, the wide part again? Basically, all that is at the very end. You kind of want to say, all right, now you've had some time to really think this all through. Do you have any other last words, or do you have any other big picture thoughts that you want to share now that you've had a chance to think this through? And in asking that final question, you're bound to get a couple of additional thoughts or some emphasis. Be comfortable uncovering the unknown unknowns, right? And that'll make your research, much, much more valuable, right? And so now it's time to share findings. Imagine that you've taken all this advice, you've gotten your questions answered. Maybe you've spoken to 5 different people, and it's
Hey, Mike, a quick
yes.
question. How do you know when to stop interviewing?
It depends on what you need to do. I would say it's never going to be statistically significant. Folks would say you probably would need to interview 30 people or more within the same group, and by then you're hearing the same things over and over again, right? So
Do you interview 30 people?
no,
For you?
no.
Okay.
What I typically do
there for a minute. I'm like, really?
No. So folks need to your stakeholders probably, hopefully they understand that you're doing qualitative. It's not just an anecdotal mess, but it's also not quantitative. It's not statistically significant because you don't have the numbers, right? And if you did have the numbers, you'd kill your budget. There's better things you can do with that time. My suggestion would be work with, say, from 5 to 7 people, right? maybe 8, but between 5 and 7 people. Interview those folks. And if you've got the right sample and you're using the same interview script, chances are after those 5 to 7 people, well, you'll know who the outliers are, right? If you only interview 3 people, you might get 3 very different answers and you won't know who the outliers are. 5 to 7, you usually start to get some patterns. And you can say, well, this person was the only person in the group that felt this way. So I know that they're the oddball. After 7, you can then evaluate. If you're trying to uncover discovery or insights, you can try and create a hypothesis at that point. You can try and figure out what the problem is you're solving, and then if you want to keep going, adjust your script. Right? If you're evaluating a prototype, adjust your prototype. Learn something from those first 5 to 7 people. Make adjustments, and
Well,
then
I have to
and
think that
then
if you're getting such a wide variety of answers and you keep on interviewing and interviewing and they're not starting to sound the same, it may be that your goal may be too broad, or you haven't been selective enough, I think, of your audience.
Well, that's
to
true
figure
too.
out who you're trying to actually target.
That's true too. And if you start to see you're getting, distinct buckets, that's another clue when you might want to, like, maybe this should be 2 different products. There's that dynamic as well.
User groups.
Yeah,
I need to target different groups of people for
yeah,
this.
yeah,
Different needs. Yeah.
yeah. So those are all different kinds of things you can learn. Don't. I guess to your point, don't assume that you're lost at sea if you can't seem to make sense out of your interviews. If all 7 people don't agree on something, you are not lost. No matter what results you get, you can take it somewhere. But to your earlier point, I would suggest, talk to a group of people of that size, make adjustments, and then talk to 5 or 7 more, make more adjustments, and then talk to 5 or 7 more, make more adjustments. You're going to get much, much further that way than if you had spoken to, 20 people all in one shot, most of the time. Unless you're doing this all by yourself, your research won't be very valuable unless you share your findings. Synthesize your notes. Hopefully, you're scribbling notes the whole time and you start to develop an ear for what you should be writing down. And then you only need to go back to your recordings if something is unclear in your notes, right? You do want to synthesize those notes. I have a whole system where I color code and I look for patterns. And at the end of it, I'll know systematically, if all 7 of my participants agreed on something, or if there was no clear winner. That's work. That's quiet, methodical work. I often wait until, I hate to say it, I'll often wait till like a Saturday afternoon. Hopefully, everyone leaves the house and I get some quiet and I can actually synthesize. But I think many folks don't realize that. That is part of what this is. And then what you want to do is present a summary. You're going to have lots and lots of details that you've learned from this. Certain folks aren't going to have the time or the need to read through all those details. So make a summary of the details. And if they question things, you can back it up with your extra notes. Be ready for skeptics. Make it foolproof. This goes back to this notion that you want to be a truth seeker. Well, guess what? Sometimes the truth can hurt. Sometimes you've got folks, stakeholders or others, who aren't going to find the truth very helpful. They're going to want to continue to believe whatever it is they believed before because maybe they've invested time into it. Be sensitive to that, but also make sure that your research is clear. Make sure that it's foolproof. And hey, it's only a success. We're getting a little background music here. It's only a success if you're successful in affecting change or validating the path forward.